and welcome to this episode of In Search for Courage and Meaning. I'm Abby of Abby Keen Healing. I'm a healer, a coach, body worker, specifically helping women in their midlife to find the courage and confidence to step into deeper meaning and purpose after years of caretaking everybody else. And I'm also mainly a human being in search for my own courage and meaning in my life. And so I'm having these conversations with my fellow humans in hope that this can inspire us to to live more courageously and authentically in our lives. And so today I have with me Bethany Ball. Thank you so much for showing up here with me.
Thank you for having me.
And would you do me the honors of introducing yourself and, whatever it is that you want us to know about you?
Okay, I'm Bethany. I'm a writer. I've been doing this for since I was a kid. And I published my first book when I think I was 40. Gosh, my math is bad. 44, something like that. After years of wanting to write and being afraid to put my work out there. So my first book came out 2017 and my second book came out last year in 2021. Yes.
Bravo.
It was really like one of the besides having children, just the best thing ever, really. It was just a happy thing in my life.
Yeah, and it's funny that you're saying besides having your kids, because it's like you gave birth to your kids and you gave birth to your books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I would venture to say you gave birth to yourself through giving birth to your books. And so I so want you to share more about that, because the women that I've been working with wish to have to sort of self-express themselves and bring more of themselves into the world, be it, a creative endeavor, be it their job, or be it even just in relationships. And it's so scary. There's so much fear there. And yet you did it. You decided in your midlife that you're like going for this. You went back to school, and there's so much exposure when you're a writer. And so if you can share a little bit more about how was it for you, what made you decide to kind of take that step, and what did you have to struggle with?
Yeah, so I had been, I had come to New York City to be in publishing, and I'd always written my stories, and I would wake up at 5 a.m. and write. And I couldn't afford an MFA when I was younger, but it was something I had always wanted to do. And then when I was 38, 39, I hadn't been writing for about 10 years. My kids were small. I had taken about 10 years off. And I just had this realization that I absolutely had to do it. And I had to start it before I turned 40 or in my 40s, because this is sort of my origin story, I feel like, as a writer. But my mother got cancer when I was 10 and she was 40, and she survived, thank God. But she always had this idea that it was the lack of fulfillment in her life that had made her sick. And this was something that she said. She was a Detroit public school teacher. She loved her job, but there were many difficult things about it, the administration and parents. And so her idea that it was this lack of fulfillment. And so when I turned 39, I was like, I must now sort of fulfill this thing in me almost as a safeguard to keep me emotionally and physically well. Wow. I mean, I really believed this in my heart that I had to do this right now.
And I'm going to pause you just for a second there, because I feel like this voice that says you have to it's so important, because we tend to cover up that voice with self-doubts, or, it might be too scary to do it once you realize that you have to. So I'd rather not listen to it. Do you remember? Do you remember how it was for you that I must do it?
Yeah, I mean, everything about it was frightening. like when you write, you don't just sit. I mean, you do for a long time, you sit and write alone, but then there has to be a certain point where you have to put your work out there. And, that's terrifying. I was writing like very personal things. All my writing, like my friends laugh at me, and probably you see this too, that all of my characters are like some version of me, really exposing myself. That was really important to me, to be, sincere. Sincerity is so important. But when I went back to school, we had a little bit of extra money, so I was able to go and get my MFA. And that was absolutely terrifying. I was the oldest person in the MFA by a lot. I think half of the program was under 25. Which was actually wonderful in a lot of ways, but completely terrifying. And I remember going to my administrator's office, this wonderful woman named Alexandra Soyseth, and crying because I felt like everybody was so much smarter than I was, and that I didn't understand the terms. I had never studied creative writing. And somehow I just stuck with it. I just wanted it so badly. I mean, I just wanted to write. I felt that it was imperative in my life, and that other than, raising my kids and my marriage, it was the most important thing to me. And I had the privilege of time to be able to do it. But I think even had I not, I would have still been waking up at 5 a.m. to make it happen. And yeah, it was really scary to read my stories out loud, and I got, it wasn't all wonderful feedback. There's a lot of criticism, and that was really, really hard. And I always laugh and say, people say, how did you deal with rejection before you published your books? I didn't, because I never sent my work out. I was like simply too afraid to deal with criticism and rejection. And so I just didn't, until something in me felt like I had to.
Yeah, and that is such an interesting point. Well, a few things that you're saying, because it sounds like the I need to do that trumped the fear of I'm terrified of doing it.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that place where we can come to, like, sincerity, but to be brutally honest with ourselves and say, I really want this.
Yeah.
I really, really want this.
And I wanted it so badly that I had to create new skills. I had the skill of accepting criticism without devolving into like a puddle of despair. That was something I had to learn to do. Nobody had taught me how to do that. That's just, I'm a sensitive person. I'm a writer. And so, but I just knew that I had to take in what people were saying to me about my work, this very personal thing that I was creating. I had to take it in, I had to accept it. And then I had to sort of figure out what was useful and what wasn't. And that was all a journey, really. And it was kind of a spiritual journey, because there has to be a center of gravity. There had to be a center of gravity in myself. And I think it took age to get there. Like I had to be 40 before I had it. I had to have a center of gravity that criticism and people's negative opinion of my work wasn't going to throw me off my axis. Does that make sense?
Makes more sense than you even know. And
Yeah.
I feel like, in a way, you go out on this path because you want to be a writer. And part of being a writer is obviously having other people read your stuff. But what you gain without necessarily meaning to is that center of gravity inside yourself, which is a kind of a self-worth of, I am sitting comfortably with myself, with my material, with what my self-expression is, and I can weather the storm of people's opinions when I'm in that place inside.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, on the way to kind of, building that center, did you have moments of like wanting to quit? Or
Oh my God, I still have moments of wanting to quit. I have this joke. I have a writer friend who's Ukrainian, and I said to her, this was just maybe like a few months ago, I want to quit writing. And she looked at me and she said, you should be so lucky, like you should be so lucky to get off this path. And, and she's right. But yeah, there are moments where I'm just like, it's really hard to struggle on the page. It's very lonely. Even with 2 books behind me, there's no guarantee of a 3rd book being published. And so it's just this labor of love. It's an almost like absurd thing to do when you have no idea what the outcome will be, and then it has to sort of become like your dharma. It has to become your sort of, or for me, my spiritual journey, where I do it and try not to think too much about the outcome of what I'm doing. I mean, it's not like a tax attorney. I always think I wish I had wanted to be a tax attorney, because a tax attorney is always useful. A tax attorney always gets paid. Everybody wants a tax attorney's services, but it's not necessarily true about a creative writer, a novelist and a short story writer. So I have to create my own worth in a way.
Right. So in a way, you're accountable to yourself only.
Yeah. I mean, there was a moment when I was trying to publish my first book. I was trying to get an agent, and my book had been with agents for like 4 months, and I wasn't sure it was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to publish this book. And my lovely mother-in-law was pushing me to become an interior decorator. And I remember thinking, like, it makes sense that people would sort of want me to find my path, and also sort of maybe not believe that this was really going to happen. But I had a moment where I thought, if I never get published, will I still continue to write if I never publish a book? And the answer was just a very clear yes. And that was when I think I knew I was on a path, and I was just never going to be able to get off it. Like my friend said, you should be so lucky to get off this path. So.
Yeah. And that brings me back to what your mom said, that in a way, if you were to betray that part of you that wishes and longs for expressing itself in this specific way, what does it do to our interior, to our system, to our soul, and therefore to our body, when we're in dissonance because we are too scared to try and go for it?
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading somewhere that women who don't express themselves, like express their anger or frustration, or I mean, I don't ever want to blame somebody for their illness at all, because I think illness just happens, but I did hang on to this idea that if I didn't express myself, it was going to lodge somehow negatively in my body. And I think in a way that might even be a superstition that was given to me by my mother. But I always had this feeling like this is a bit of my armor, to protect myself, to stay healthy, like whether it's even just psychologically healthy. And my second book deals with a woman who has breast cancer. And when I thought about writing that book, I thought, I'm going to write about the scariest thing that could possibly ever happen to me. And it was that, because I had gone through it with my mom. And I remember talking to our mutual friend, Yvette Sims, and she said, she was helping me, with some of the medical details of the book. And she said, this is your homeopathic remedy. I mean, knock on wood. I'm so foot. But I remember, I really thought, that's amazing, because honestly, I have no idea what will happen to me health-wise, but the fear no longer exists in me. That was written out. That was like an exorcism. This book that I wrote was an exorcism of that fear.
Yeah.
And I think I don't write for therapy. I always say I don't write for therapy, but I think it's a byproduct of creative expression.
I love that. I love what you just said, because I feel when we carry fear in our system, it can turn into a dis-ease. And for all these women out there who are holding back their voice
Yeah.
in this thing that you really long to bring out into the world, not to be an alarmist or say you're going to be sick, but I don't even know how to say it. The importance of bringing it out is not just a question of it would be nice to. There's something fundamental in our system that wishes to be expressed and in flow. And I feel like you kind of cleaning the fear out and also coming back to, "Oh, I must do this." You are keeping this flow within yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had this wonderful teacher who's a bit of a maniac, but his name is Gordon Lish. And he said something like, you have to work with your wound. You have to work with your wound. And I think, people go to therapy for that, and they do creative arts for that. And there are all kinds of ways, but I do think fundamentally we have to work with the things in us that are wounded. We can't cover them up or pretend they don't exist. I don't think. Me personally, I cannot. And I think that, my mother sort of in her way was my role model and she eventually she did survive, and she did have an amazing, 20 more years after that. But yeah, it was a big lesson for me, I think.
So how do you get back in the saddle? Because you said that even just a few months ago, you said, I wanted to quit. And then you come back to face that part of you that, can I really quit and still be aligned inside? Like still be doing what I'm here to do. So how?
I cannot find anything that to replace writing. I think about it a lot. Like, is there something I can do that would make me feel, when it's going well, as fulfilled and happy as writing books and stories? And the answer just is, again and again, it's just no. And I feel I've come to the point in my life where it's like a compulsion. I always have my laptop open. I always have my notes app open. Everything that I do that's not really with my kid, in terms of, if I go on a vacation, it's to do a residency, to try to write, it's unless I'm vacationing with my family. I'm at this point where my whole life, I'm so wrapped up in that world that I wouldn't even know how to leave it. And most of me is really grateful for all of that. And then a part of me is like, am I ever going to get away from this? And the answer is probably no. I mean, as long as I have my mental faculties, I'll probably be engaging with creative work, writing in some way.
Right. And as you speak, I'm like, what I'm getting from you is, if you decide to not do it, it's almost like you're retreating into your comfort zone, where things are safe and maybe more predictable. But that juiciness, like you said, compulsion, but it's a juiciness that you get ideas and you want to write them down, and you see something or you hear something. It's very like of the senses, and you want to capture it in words. And so being on that edge of your comfort zone is so much more alive.
Yeah.
And it oftentimes extremely uncomfortable. You say when it's going well, it's great, but when it's not going well, there's so much to learn from that place of it's not going well, and that friction at the edge of the comfort zone, that it feels more alive than retreating into something familiar and safe and giving up on that edge, giving that edge up.
Because there's more to it than just sitting and writing. I mean, there's a whole, like, this is the end of the year. And so, all of the magazines are putting out their best books of 2022. And all of that stuff is it's painful as a writer when your book doesn't make a list or your book doesn't win an award or but that's kind of that's the shadow part of the wonderful thing that I do. But it's just as important probably to me as a human being who is trying to evolve, because I have to deal with my feelings of inadequacy and my feelings of competition and jealousy. I mean, these are all human emotions. And in a way, it's almost a privilege to have to face them every day. But it's sometimes it's extraordinarily painful. I mean, really, it's very painful. Um, and I just have to roll with it, because it's not all, I mean, you publish a book, it's not all wonderful, rose petals falling from the sky. I mean, there's a new layer of difficulty that you have to work with. And I think as people who are trying to evolve and grow and, whatever it is you feel your life's purpose, this is definitely a part of it. But that's the part I want to run away from, not the writing, but all the stuff that goes along with publishing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think I know enough. I'm old enough, in a way, maybe this is the great thing about publishing later in life. I'm old enough to know how important facing those difficult things about publishing are to me as a person.
Yeah. And as a human being who wishes to grow
Yeah.
in this world, so there's of course, the success of the book. And then there's that inner growth where if you weren't on your edge and putting yourself out there, you would not be aggravating these wounds. And
Right.
then you would get to see them and work on them and look them in the eye and learn so much about who you are. And like going back to the beginning of our conversation, build that center of gravity.
Yes, exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's the gift and the difficulty and the struggle.
Yeah, I mean, they're just as important, but I forget that because you can sort of almost like go under, like you're kind of treading water at sea, and then a big wave of, oh my God, I didn't get on that list. And then you're like underwater for a few minutes, like fighting. It feels like that. I mean, it really does. But I think that rather than, and I do this, I'm speaking from my own experience, like rather than thinking, oh, that's like toxic, that's bad for me. I mean, I have to look it in the eye and say, no, this is exactly what I need.
Yeah.
And I need to face it and I need to deal with it and I need to overcome it and I need to just go forward. Um, my friend, David Means, who's a NIAC person, he said to me once, no effort is ever wasted. The story that doesn't get published, the book that doesn't do as well as I hoped, none of those efforts are wasted. And I think that's true on the level of my writing. And it's true on the level of like my soul work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll share with you that last year I tried to do something for my business that totally flopped. And not to get into too many details, I was devastated. I think I cried for like 3 days. I felt like the biggest loser in the world, and definitely lots of judgments about, I knew you could not make it. It's never going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And take two at the end of the year, when I looked back to kind of assess the things that I learned this year and I achieved that year, I looked at that as the best experience that I had all year, because I learned so much from falling flat on my face.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it was like this thing that I was so scared will one day happen, and it happened. And then I picked myself up and continued. And I thought, I think I learned more from failing than I did if this thing that I was trying to build would have worked.
Yeah.
And I feel like that relates to what you're saying, that yes, as an author, you want to succeed, but you're also seeing how your failures are not actually failures, because this is where like your rubber meets your road, where
Yeah.
you get to, work on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So go ahead.
I just wanted to say, if there's anybody who is interested in writing, I just wanted to say a couple things. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Just that there's a few things that come up with people our age who are wanting to write. And I hear from people, and to me, the people 40 and up, 40, 50 and up who want to write are the most interesting to me. And often they have the most interesting things to say. And one thing people say to me is, oh, I really want to write about my sister, but I know she'll get offended. And I have, as you know, I've been there, done that with family stuff, but you can always write everything you want. You can always change it and disguise people later. But you shouldn't let that stop you from writing the story you want to tell.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think that people like to keep the idea of writing in their back pocket as like this thing, almost like a jewel that you can pick up and like hold and then hide away again. Like the possibility of writing for some people, I think, is better than the actual sitting down and writing. And I just want to say that to get over that and move forward is even better than that little hidden jewel that you carry in your pocket, to bring something into fruition, even if it's a failure. And I have many books in my drawers that will never see the light of day. It is much more fulfilling. The actual act of working towards something you really want is so much more fulfilling than, scrolling on your Netflix or on your, Instagram and keeping this idea hidden away. So
Yeah. And thank you so much for saying that, because I usually like to ask if you can, if you have a message for those out there who are struggling with something similar, what would it be? And I feel like what you just said is so important, because there's such a gap between an idea and a dream.
yes,
And the actual doing. And once we open that door, when we're actually trying to do it in life for real, we encounter things that didn't exist in theory.
right.
And also what I'm hearing is an invitation from you to say that you're saying, do it.
Yeah, just do it. It's like, it's all of those quotes, and I think of this one all the time: feel the fear and do it anyway. The other book that was really helpful to me, I don't know if you read this, The Year of Saying Yes
Oh, I
by
did.
Shonda Rhimes, I
Yeah,
think.
the Grey's Anatomy woman. Yeah.
Yeah. That book, I read that when I think right when I got my book contract, because I knew there were going to be a million terrifying things that I was going to have to do once I published a book. Publicity things. I was terrified of speaking in public. And I was like, I'm just going to say yes to everything, every single thing that comes my way. And that was super helpful. And I think that book is a great way of moving forward for people.
Yeah.
It was really helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So a last question comes to mind for me, which is, how do you feel now in yourself, in your person, in your body, compared to before you started on this path of allowing yourself to be expressed?
I mean, I feel like the writing, becoming a writer or dedicating yourself to some craft is a little bit analogous to becoming an athlete.
Mhm.
So that you can be a hobbyist, and I'm a hobbyist tennis player, and I can't do as many practices or lessons as I'd like to, and I accept where I am as a hobbyist. Or you can be a pro, and to be a pro means that you are working at it all the time. And that's how I feel. I feel like it is almost an athletic endeavor where if I know I need to write, I'm not going to drink the day before. I'm going to make sure I get enough sleep, and also just sort of this idea that I'm in training all the time and working towards these goals and this craft. And so, you know, as much as I struggle, and it's as hard as it is, it's just, I think that even beyond publishing books, the feeling of being so dedicated to something that feels a little bit bigger than me
Mm.
is just the greatest blessing of my life. It almost feels like a miracle. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I had always been, you know, I had never really had a lot of success in my jobs or my careers. And so it wasn't even so much the success, or you know, you could look at my career and say there isn't still a lot of success, but it's just the act of dedicating myself to this.
Yeah. And to this specifically, something that is from a very deep part of you.
Yeah. But you know, it could have been knitting, it could have been
Mm.
weaving, it could have been tennis, you know, too. I mean, it didn't have to be something like writing books, you know, it could have been, you know, joining a choir, which is something there's a lot of things I've always kind of wanted. The one thing I'll tell you, besides tennis, I've always wanted to learn French. And I realized that I just was thinking about this yesterday when I was thinking about what we would talk about, that I realize I will never be fluent in French because it requires that kind of profession. This is your profession. And I don't mean like I become a professional French speaker, but I have put so much effort into it, the way that I have writing. And it really does require, you know, to write books really does require a kind of professionalism. Like you're a professional now, whether you succeed or not. You know,
Yeah.
you're living like that. Like my son, who was a tennis player, is a tennis player. I mean, he wound up at the highest level, college level, for a year. And it was because he was a professional. You know, he took it like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't a hobby. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I feel like I am left with the invitation that, or not with the invitation, but the insight that there's a choice here. You know, we say we want to do something, we want to do something. I wish I could, I want to do something. And I'm feeling through your story that we have a choice. We we can want it and go for it.
mhm.
And we get to decide how much energy we're going to put into it. And so I am not a victim in my life. I can take charge, and it's up to me.
Yeah,
If I really want it, I need to get back on the saddle. I need to put my time and energy. And I feel for anybody out there who's wondering how, and oh, and I wish, yes, you can.
yeah.
It just means that you have to do it.
Yeah, it's and exactly, and it's the choices. I mean, am I gonna spend? I have a couple days off from everything, my kids, my family. Am I gonna spend the next 2 days watching Netflix films, you know, and sitting by on the, you know, watching TV, or am I gonna go to the beach, or am I gonna just sit and just freaking write for 2 days, you know? And what I found myself doing was writing for anytime I had a chance to. That was what I was doing. And
Yeah.
it is difficult and lonely, but it's been the most rewarding thing in my life,
Mm.
um, outside my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so, so, so much
Yeah, thank
for
you.
all this wisdom and sharing. And of course, I'll put your website under our YouTube thing if anybody doesn't know you and wants to learn more about your books. And of
Yeah,
course, if you anybody out there wants to know more about my work, there'll be a link there as well. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.